While some New Orleans Saints stars don't necessarily get the recognition that they deserve on a national basis, defensive end Cameron Jordan leaves absolutely no doubt. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints. Part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much as always for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget that we're free and available on all podcast apps and on YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter. You can find me over at USA Today's Saints Wire, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. In today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're going to be breaking down the defensive line, but more specifically Cam Jordan, who was recognized as a top 10 defensive end going into the 2022 season, and why I believe he'll be top 5 at the end of the 2022 season. We'll also discuss whether or not the Saints missed out on re-signing Trey Hendrickson. Do you think that's a decision that they regret after his first year in Cincinnati? And we'll wrap up with a quick look and a quick refresher on defensive line position techniques. We'll break all of that down so you know the difference between a nose tackle, 1-tech, 2-tech, all the way out to 7, wide 9, all those things as well. Break down what their responsibilities are and talk a bit about why it's so important for the New Orleans Saints with the versatility of their defensive line. But I want to start off with Cam Jordan here, who is recognized by ESPN Plus and effectively recognized by the NFL as a top 10 edge defender in the National Football League. Now, a lot of folks will look at this as edge rusher, but when I talk about Cam Jordan, Marcus Davenport, Peyton Turner, I tend to use the kind of delineation of edge defender over edge rusher, just because their responsibilities in this New Orleans Saints defense, on Ryan Nielsen's defensive line, and in Dennis Allen's scheme are a lot more than just getting after the passer, right? It's limiting the run. It's, being a disruptor in the backfield. It's making plays out in the flats when there's a pass out to, the flats to a defensive back in the back, a running back in the backfield, all of that. So their game is so much more about being all around impacts on defense as opposed to a pass rush impact solely on defense. Now you can look at Cam Jordan last year, 12.5 sacks. That ended up being his 10th straight season with 7.5 more sacks, which has only been achieved by a few people, most of which are currently Hall of Famers, most recently Jared Allen. You look at the fact that he was also, didn't have his first sack until week 7 of the season, once they got kind of David Onyemata back, and then they got the whole defensive line back, with the exception of Peyton Turner, of course, who was battling injury throughout the season, but he's been medically cleared. He's ready to come back to camp, so that's going to be a huge benefit for the New Orleans Saints. I spoke more about that last week, as well as over on Monday's Locked On NFL, that, he gives you a lot of versatility in terms of the rotation that you're going to have there. But once the Saints kind of had all their pieces, Cam Jordan was kind of free to go off. He got a lot more, potential one-on-one situations. They moved him around a lot more. There was just a lot more that he was able to do, and a lot of different ways that he was able to impact the game. So let's talk about some of that impact and how it is that he found his way. So when we look at this ESPN Plus article, the way that they broke this down was they actually pulled NFL executives, NFL players, NFL coaches. So this isn't just somebody like me sitting behind a computer saying, okay, here are the top 10 edge rushers in the NFL. These are the people that coach, the people that hire, and the people that play. And that's a really, really good barometer in terms of how people are impacted or how they feel that they're impacted by other players. The rest of the top 10 includes names like Khalil Mack, Brian Burns, who was fantastic last year, Chandler Jones, Von Miller. The list, of course, is led off by TJ Watt, Myles Garrett, and then the Bosa brothers, effectively kind of going back to back there. So Cam Jordan's in really good company as a top 10 edge rusher in the NFL, but that's unsurprising because this is a premier position in the league. So if you're in the top 10, then you're going to be, amongst those biggest names. Now, an NFC scout here has a quote: "Until he shows tangible drop off, like some of the younger players who haven't even had nearly the production, despite getting all the attention from protections like Cam Jordan does, I'd say that Cam hasn't fallen off." So there's a whole conversation around Cam Jordan early on in the season, last season, about him, maybe slipping, maybe regressing a little bit. Then he finished up with 8.5 sacks in the last 4 games of the season after, missing that New York Jets game, the first game that he's missed in a very, very long time. It broke a snap record that he had held, all of that. And he came out of that and had, the whatever superpowers he got during that off week, and then ended up going off for 8.5 sacks to wrap up the season. But on top of having that, it wasn't just about the sacks. ESPN here quotes that he ranked second among defensive ends in disrupted dropbacks, 22.5. He produced double-digit sacks 4 of the past 5 seasons, and he's been great against the run with a 33.5% run stop win rate, which is highest amongst all of the players on that top 10 list. So it just goes to show you that it's not just about what you do as a pass rusher. It's about what you do as an edge defender in addition to all of that. You look at all the places that he played on this line. He played mostly off of the left side, but he also rushed for over 160 snaps on the on the right side. Played a considerable amount of snaps on the inside as well. Even had a snap as a nose tackle at one point. So he's somebody that you move around a bunch and that you utilize in a bunch of different ways. And then if you look at, do you put all of your stock into PFF grades? Probably not. But when you look at some of the PFF grades for him, like, there has not been a drop off for Cam Jordan. 91.2 in 2017, 89.9 in 2018, 86.9 in 2019, 84.6 in 2020. So you can see kind of a downward bend there, but then 84.3. So he's right back where he was the season before at in 2021. And then as a run defender, he's only gone up now as an 87.1 defense rate there. And then he's at, in terms of pass rush, a 69.7 pass rush grade, which is a pretty nice grade. So he's looked pretty good throughout the last 5 seasons, and he hasn't really started to show any type of fall off in terms of his production, in terms of numbers, anything like that. Now, he produced fewer total pressures last year with 51. It had been 61, 84, 72, 88, 79 over the course of the past few years. So you look to see if he's going to be able to rebound there. But again, that disruption rate of 22.5% was number 2 in the NFL. So he was getting back there and he was disrupting backfields and he was doing, he was generating pressure, all of that. I think one of the things that you're going to look at here too is the amount of places that he took snaps from and all the different ways that he was moved around and used. And it's not just about playing defensive end and defensive tackle, playing on the inside or out, but sometimes your responsibilities are different depending upon where you play as a defensive end. If you're playing as a wide 9 defensive end, so you're all the way outside the tight end, for instance, your objective is to rush the passer. But if you're playing as what would be a 5 tech, effectively just basically over the tackle, then in that case, your responsibility instead might be more of run defense, more about sealing the edge, more about controlling the edge, all of that. And of course, you're getting a lot more double teams and things when you are really the only threat on the defensive line for the first 6 games of the season, like Cam Jordan was in 2021. So I think all of those things factor in. But in 2022, when all of the players should be available, you have the confidence of a great secondary behind you, you have the confidence of a great second level behind you. I'm curious to see how all of that ends up impacting Cam Jordan going into 2022 and whether or not he's going to be able to be a top 5 guy the next time that this list releases, because I think that he will, because of all of those factors. We know Cam Jordan consistently credits the defense around him for his success. And I think that that's something you look ahead to 2022, there should be that overall defensive success that also translates into his success in 2022. So I think that he'll finish the season as a top 5 defensive end, or go into next year as a top 5 defensive end the next time of this poll releases, as opposed to being number 10 on that top 10 list. Now, the interesting thing is that that number 10 spot was one that he actually had to edge out a former teammate in Trey Hendrickson in order to get. Trey Hendrickson had 14 sacks last year. Do we think that the New Orleans Saints regret letting him walk and heading over to Cincinnati? I'll tell you why I don't think that they do as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Before we get to that, I want to tell you about our friends over at Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar on the market, and the return of the amazing coconut brownie chunk Built Bar. It's a fan favorite. It's a favorite here at the network. The group DMs go nuts every time that these Built Bars come back. So when I say go quickly to the website to go and get them, I don't mean so that you can make sure that you get them before the general population sells them out. You need to run and go and get them before the NFL hosts sell them out, because they will come after these coconut brownie chunk Built Bars, and they're only here for a limited time as well. So make sure that you don't miss out. Go to built.com right now and check everything out. They're going to go fast because they are and taste amazing. So you can also grab, any of your favorite Built bars as well. You can get yourself a sample box that you can get 2 of every one of the flavors. You can check out the Built the Built granola bars. You could check out the Built Puffs. So many things for you to choose from, but I highly recommend making sure you get this coconut brownie chunk Built bar. You can get it over at built.com today. Use promo code LOCKED15, LOCKED15, so you can get 15% off of your order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Thanks again, as always, for making us your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, make sure you go and check out Locked On Pelicans today. Kendrick Perkins officially announcing his apology to the New Orleans Pelicans fans, and the city of New Orleans. I'm sure Jake will comment on that here soon, but still so much with the Summer League right around the way, and the Pelicans looking like they might have the strongest and best Summer League lineup going into this year. So could they walk away as Summer League champions? Jake breaks it all down on today's Locked On Pelicans. Make sure you go and check that out. Today, though, we're talking here on Locked On Saints about Cam Jordan, the defensive line. But right now, I want to discuss a little bit about Trey Hendrickson, former New Orleans Saint, who apparently Cam Jordan had to slightly edge out in ESPN's top 10 defensive end or edge rusher rankings. He was the first honorable mention, basically saying that he put up a massive 2-year stretch with 27.5 sacks, 52 quarterback hits, and signed on a 4-year, $60 million deal with Cincinnati after departing from the New Orleans Saints, who let him walk after his rookie contract was up. Now, there are 2 things to consider here: production and contract, right? 4 years, $60 million on that contract. So not a huge contract, but still top end edge defender money, $15 million per year. So maybe like mid to top end money. Is that something that the Saints would regret paying Trey Hendrickson, looking back at his production off of his second big year? Honestly, he had 13.5 sacks with the Saints, followed it up with 14 sacks with the Cincinnati Bengals. Do the Saints regret not keeping Trey Hendrickson in the building? And I think that there is an element and an argument to be made about why they do, but I think that there's a stronger argument to be made about why they don't. The argument to be made about why they do would come down to the injuries that they've dealt with on the defensive line opposite Cam Jordan last year. Marcus Davenport missing several games, Peyton Turner missing effectively, most of the season. And then, Carl Granderson kind of being in and out, Tano Passanio being injured. So I think that the injuries are the reason why you argue in favor of Trey Hendrickson, especially looking at the fact that for the Cincinnati Bengals last year, he played all 16 games, 14 of which as a starter. He also added 34 tackles, 12 of which for a loss, and 27 quarterback hits in last year. So that's really, really good. And of course was a Pro Bowler and helped the Cincinnati Bengals go to the Super Bowl last year. But the reason why I don't think that the Saints regret not keeping Trey Hendrickson around is that 4-year, $60 million contract. That's a big contract to give somebody with 1 year of production coming into that New Orleans Saint, his final, or coming out of his rookie deal, right? 13.5 sacks in 2020, 4.5 in 2019, 0 with only 5 games played in 2018, 2 with only 12 games played in 2017. So he had 6.5 sacks, and then all of a sudden in 2020 went off and more than doubled that production. Do you want to pay $15 million per year on average, right? The contract structure is always going to be different than that. But do you want to pay $15 million per year, $60 million total to a player that had that 1 year of production? I think any smart organization would pump the brakes on that. And I think Cincinnati was in a position with a lot of money to spend, and being a franchise that felt like it was right on the cusp, and being a franchise that usually doesn't spend a lot of money. But right now they have all these rookie contracts and all the money in the world to spend, that it made sense for them to go out and maybe make a run at that player. And it paid off for them in 2021. But I think for New Orleans, when you look at where else that money has gone over the course of the past couple of years, signing and keeping Jameis Winston, there's somebody who hates every time that I mention Tyrann Mathieu and Jarvis Landry, but that factors in, right? Not having to pay $15 million this year to an edge rusher, or $15 million last year that you kicked down the road into this year and then have to kick down the road into future years, helps you sign guys like that. Re-signing DeMario Davis could have been impacted by that. You look at the signing of, even just the trading of draft picks and draft assets so that you could afford to have 2 first rounders this year, 2 first round contracts this year. all of those things end up having an impact and could have been impacted by investing premier money in a premier position. Now, would you do that so you can get 14 sacks opposite Cam Jordan's 12.5? Yes, but are you guaranteed to get that? And would Trey Hendrickson's role have been the same in New Orleans as it was in Cincinnati? And I don't think it would have. Trey Hendrickson would have been a rotational player in the New Orleans Saints defense, just like he was in 2020. Now, in 2020, he also had a little bit of more opportunity because of the injuries to Marcus Davenport and all of that. But he went from having 586 total defensive snaps for the New Orleans Saints in 2020 based on injury to having 893 as a starter in 2021. And let's just face it, the New Orleans Saints would not have put Trey Hendrickson up above their usual prototypical guys like Marcus Davenport and maybe even Peyton Turner in 2021. And so with that being the case, I think that you look at the 560 pass rushing snaps that Trey Hendrickson got in 2021 for the Bengals, and he might not have seen over 400 in the New Orleans Saints defense. So I think that's another thing, right? So really there's a third layer there. There's the production, there's the money, and then there's the role. And that's another reason why the money doesn't make sense, because the role would not have been the same in New Orleans. So you wouldn't have gotten 14 sacks out of Trey Hendrickson very likely in the New Orleans Saints system last year. It just wouldn't have happened considering the rotation. And the New Orleans Saints wouldn't have paid $15 million per year for you to be a part of a 2, 3, 4 player rotation at your position. So I think that with the style, the scheme, what the New Orleans Saints defense is, the way that they like to spend money and the way that they smartly spend money based on the role that they project for you within their defense, it makes a lot of sense that the New Orleans Saints let Trey Hendrickson go. And it makes a lot of sense that they didn't regret doing so and don't regret doing so at this time. Now, we'll see what happens in 2022. If he goes off in 2022, then yeah, I think you start to regret it at that point. Or you start to kind of talk about him as one of the ones that got away, kind of the same way they talk about Rob Ninkovich, or the same way they talked about Malcolm Jenkins before they brought him back. I think you can start at that point. But after this 1 year, I think as of right now, the Saints are very comfortable with the roster that they've been able to build with the funds that they have based on the roles that they utilize and the way that their scheme benefits from that utilization, as opposed to feeling like you have to change that role, up the snaps based upon the amount of money that you're spending. Pay for how you're using players. Don't use players based upon how much you're spending on them. Just smart football at that point. Now, speaking of those roles, sometimes those roles are defined by the defensive line technique that linemen are playing. So let's break that down and do a quick refresher on what it means to line up as a 1-tech, a 2-tech, 3-tech, 2-eye, all of those things, and which New Orleans Saints most commonly line up where, so that you know what to look for in the 2022 Saints defensive season. We got that coming up for you as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. Let's get it. Who Dat Nation, wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with our usual midweek fundamentals. Now, this is something we talked about here recently from the offensive line perspective, something we broke down last summer as well that people seem to like. We have a lot of new viewers, a lot of new listeners. So I like to make sure that we reprise some of these conversations every now and then to make sure that we're all, getting together and understanding some football as best as we can. We talked about this from the offensive line perspective of A gaps, B gaps, C gap, A gap being the gap between center and guard, B gap being the gap between guard and tackle, and then C gap being the space outside of the tackle, potentially between tackle and tight end, depending upon the formation. So oftentimes you'll hear about, a blitzer shooting the A gap, shooting the B gap, things like that. That just designates which two players effectively on the offensive line that defender came through and where those gaps are, because there are natural gaps between players because we only take up so much space with our size and mass. So now we look on the other side of this, on the defensive side, where things are numbered as opposed to lettered. So it just kind of changes the way that we talk about it. And there's a lot more detail when it comes there. If you're watching over on YouTube, I've got a visual aid for you. If you're listening, don't worry. We're going to be able to talk through all of this just like we've done before. And this is super easy to break down and super easy to grasp as we go through. The thing to remember above all else is that lining up over a center is known as zero technique, or the nose guard. Anywhere you go to the left of that, moving out towards the left tackle or moving out towards the right tackle, if you're on the defensive left, goes from 0 to 9. Same thing on the right side. Anywhere you go on, outside toward the right, toward the left tackle on your defensive right, goes from 0 to 9 as well. So you could talk about this going either direction. So you don't have to remember different numbers depending on if you're over left guard, left tackle, or right guard, right tackle. It's the same rules no matter what. So let's go ahead and break all of this down, and we'll talk a little bit too about what the New Orleans Saints utilize and what you want to look for in 2022. So over the center is where we're going to start, right? That's your zero technique. If you move effectively one step to the outside to where you're over the outside shoulder of that center, or over the shoulder of the center on either side, so you're basically lining up on the inside of the A gap, right? That's considered one technique. One technique, very much a run stop, but also pass rush, or very much a run stop, kind of trying to create some disruption in the middle of the offensive line type of position. Now, if you can get pass rush pressure there, that's fantastic, because that interior pass rush pressure throws everything off, from timing to balance for the quarterback, expectation, everything gets thrown off in terms of the rhythm of the play if you can generate pass rush pressure there. But it's a great place to have a really good interior penetrator that can be disruptive in the run game for sure. So you love having that. So that's your over the center rules. Now we're going to move to either guard. Remember, it doesn't matter if you're going left or right. And then so if you're over the inside shoulder, i.e. the shoulder that's closest to the center, right, is inside. If you're thinking outside, you're going more towards the tackle. Inside shoulder of the guard is 2I. Directly over, so you're nose to nose with the guard, that's 2. And if you go to the outside shoulder of the guard, that's 3 technique. So 2I, think of it as a 2 inside, right? You're playing inside the shoulder, or you're playing inside 2 technique. 2 technique is, if I'm a guard, you and I are looking eye to eye, right? We're right there, right? You're coming right for me, I'm coming right for you, all of that. And then 3 technique is if you're over on the opposite shoulder. Very likely, most of the time, you'll see a 1 technique and a 3 technique pairing on the inside. The Saints will vary this depending upon which side of the field is what. So sometimes the 1 technique is over the center's left shoulder, while the 3 technique is outside the right guard, or vice versa, right? To where they'll swap it up to where the 3 technique is over the outside shoulder of the left guard, and the 1 technique is over the right shoulder of the center. And this just creates some opportunities to generate some pass rush, to really get mixy in the middle, as Brandon Olson of Locked On Gators would say, all of that. So the big thing to know when it comes to 3 technique is that 3 technique is usually your primary pass rushing, your primary penetrator on the defensive line that's looking to get after the quarterback, but that's also ready to get, disruptive in the run game and all of that. So you'll see the Saints use this a lot, those pairings of 1 technique and 3 technique on either side of the field. You'll also see the Saints oftentimes use what's called a 2I and 4I. So now we're going to go and move from guard to tackle. So either tackle that you're over, if you're over the inside shoulder of that tackle, it's the same rule as the 2I on the inside shoulder of the guard. It's 4I there, 4 inside. Nose to nose with the tackle, 4 outside shoulder of the tackle, 5 technique. These are all designated as defensive and run stopping positions. When Cam Jordan was drafted, for instance, he was drafted to join the New Orleans Saints as a 5 tech and be a run stopper. That was going to be his role. Then all of a sudden, the second year of his career, he's racking up, a ton of sacks, and he's almost hitting double-digit sacks right off the bat. I think he was 7.5 sacks. His second season, only had 1 sack, but only really played like limited amount of snaps his rookie year and all of that. But he played a lot as a run stopper, a 5 technique, just outside the tackle. So if you want to talk about pass rushing techniques, then that's where you're getting to outside of the tackle. 7 tech would be on the inside shoulder of a tight end if a tight end was lined up there. Now, the important thing to remember is, we're going to talk about this, is if you're lining up over a tight end, but sometimes the tight end's not there. And so you're visibly creating the tight end and then kind of lining up off of where a tight end would be. So 7 technique would be on the inside shoulder of the tight end. 6 technique would be eye to eye with the tight end. 9 technique would be the outside shoulder of the tight end. These are all pass rushing designations. You're coming for the quarterback in any of those, or you're playing contain, right? You might be, in a wide 9 situation to where you're 9, but then another step outside, right? So you're outside the tight end box, but then you're another step out there. But your goal might actually be to contain Jalen Hurts, not necessarily put the pass rush on him or put the heat on him and all that. But that 7, sort of 6 and 9 situation there, those are very much about getting after the pass rush, or getting after the quarterback rather. So those are your big time designations. What you're looking for from the New Orleans Saints this year is how many different players play all of the different techniques. And this happens every year, right? Sometimes Marcus Davenport lines up on the inside. Sometimes Cam Jordan lines up on the inside. That's an example of some versatility from outside to in, but there's more specific versatility than that. David Onyemata gets used as a 0 tech, a 1 tech, 2I, 2, 3 tech. He gets used from 0 to, he gets used, let's just say eye to eye from the center all the way to the outside of the guard. He gets used all around there. Cam Jordan gets utilized on either side of the line, pretty much anywhere from 4 all the way out to 9, right? So he gets used in 6 different positions while playing one, or 6 different techniques while playing one position. So that becomes the additional variety that you end up being used, because all of a sudden, if you are lining up, let's say, as a 4I, right? So you're on the inside shoulder of the left tackle, right? And you're Cam Jordan. Your techniques of rushing to the inside shoulder of that tackle are going to be different than your pass rush approach and your pass rushing plan to lining up at 5 outside of that tackle. So that ends up putting so much stress on that tackle that they have to be ready for a whole new set of moves, a whole new pass rushing plan because of where you're rushing from. And it's as simple as looking him in the eye, being over one of his shoulders, or being just outside of his frame once you get to 7, 6, or 9 technique, right? So everything ends up being impacted for that offensive line, and it helps to wear down the offensive line when you're lining up in all these different places. Plus, you consider the fact that they can cycle these players in and out, and any player on the defensive line effectively, in the New Orleans Saints defensive line specifically, has the ability to play in multiple techniques as a pass rusher from their position or as a run stopper from their position. So that ends up also keeping your best talent fresh while the offensive line is playing 100% of snaps. That ends up having and being a huge benefit for you in the fourth quarter, late on like 10-play drives, things like that. That's why guys like Marcus Davenport, who consistently make plays late in long play drives, who make plays on third down as a situational pass rusher, and who make plays in the fourth quarter, end up finding success at those points because they're kept fresh. They're generating confusion about all the different places that they'll line up to come after you as an offensive lineman. Meanwhile, the offensive line, they play that one position that entire time and rarely leave the field when the offense is on the field. So you have the ability to outlast, outsmart, and out-game plan offensive lines when you have a defensive line as versatile as the New Orleans Saints. So that's our quick look. Well, I don't want to say quick look, maybe detailed look at defensive line techniques, the value of Cam Jordan going into 2022, and the question around Trey Hendrickson. The Saints might not regret him now, but will they regret him later? It's a wait and see game at the moment. Coming up tomorrow, we're continuing on with our excitement week here on Locked On Saints. Could the New Orleans Saints walk away with multiple end-of-year awards by the end of 2022, and why 3 of them could all be tied together? We'll break all that down, as well as keeping you up to date with everything you need to know around your New Orleans Saints in tomorrow's episode of Locked On Saints. A couple of quick shout outs. Happy belated birthday to Jerry and Wayne, and a shout out to Roosevelt at the Rum House for saying hi. Appreciate y'all as always for making us your first listen of the day every day here on Locked On Saints. Now make sure you go and check out Locked On NFL as well. Everything you need to know around the league in less than 30 minutes. You can find it wherever you're listening to this podcast and on YouTube as well. I appreciate you as always making me a part of your day and a part of your routine. I'll see you tomorrow. If you see me, say hi. But of course, if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.